All right, you can have a seat. Welcome, welcome. We're so glad that you're here at Fairfax. Welcome to those who are watching online, to those that are here in the blue seats. It's great to have you with us today. A lot of stuff that's going on. We want you to be aware of it, so take a look at this.
Hey Fairfax, we are so excited that you've joined us today. I have a few announcements for you, but first, if you are new here, I want to say welcome. We are so excited that you have joined us today. If you are here in person, we invite you to just stop by our welcome table outside the front doors, and if you're here online, go ahead and click on the New Here button above your screen. One of the most important ways that we gather together as a community is in our small groups. And if you are interested in joining a group, we invite you to stop by our welcome table in person on your way outside of service. And if you're online, just go ahead and click on the groups button above your screen. If you and your family are looking to give back this holiday season, we invite you to join one of our VOMO projects. You can visit our website to learn more or download the VOMO app. The Christmas season is just around the corner, and we are so excited that so many of you have already registered to join us. If you and your family want to experience Christmas at Fairfax in person, we have room in all 5 of our services. And if you're looking to experience the service in the main sanctuary specifically, there's room at the 1 o'clock and 2:30 p.m. services. Spaces are filling up quickly, so make sure that you RSVP as soon as possible on our website. If you've already registered to attend with us, but your plans have changed, please let us know, and that way we can let others have an opportunity to attend the service in person. If you need to cancel or modify your reservation, please email ValerieNolan@fairfax.cc. This year, our global marketplace is fully online. We have one-of-a-kind handmade items made by artists who are supported by our global partners. So if you are looking for a last-minute Christmas gift, you can visit our website or stop by the global marketplace table on your way out of services this weekend. We are so excited to enter into this Christmas season with you, Fairfax. We'll see you soon.
All right, a lot of stuff that's going on around this place in December, and it's very cool. I want to kind of reinforce a couple things, but first of all, December for us, one of our core values here at Fairfax is generosity, and we talk about that year-round. It just kind of defines us as a church, but December is a kind of the month of generosity. It's the opportunity for us every year to kind of finish the year strong and then position ourselves for what God has in store in 2021. And here's the deal, is that we said the same thing coming into 2020 of what God has in store, and we had no idea what God had in store. But that's kind of part of the faith walk, is that we position ourselves relationally, financially, in every way, so that whatever it is that God has in store for us in 2021, that we are prepared for it. So we just encourage you during the month of generosity as you kind of wrap up your year-end giving to think about Fairfax in kind of a special way. If you want to give as an act of worship today, if you're online, there's a little button that says give, and you can start the process there. If you're here in the sanctuary, there are offering boxes in the back of the sanctuary you can use. You can text Fairfax Give to 77977. All right, so I mentioned a lot of cool stuff that's happening in December, and our Christmas Eve services are coming up. We have 5 services, and as Jess mentioned, we want to encourage you to get registered for those, get signed up for those. You can do that online. But here's just what I want to say to you as your pastor. If you sign up, show up. If you register, make sure that you are there. And the reason I say that is a couple of reasons. One, we've had 2 amazing events already this year in our Advent prayer service and in our Fairfax Carol service, and they're just limited. A lot of people have to watch it online. It's limited how many can come in because we just want to be safe and keep distancing and all of that. And we hate the fact that we have to limit it, but we do. And so each time we've had 100 people who have registered for each of those events who did not show up. And the thing with that, and we know that plans change and all of that, but the problem, of course, with that is that there's probably another 100 people that had they had the opportunity, they would have been there in person. And so as you register for Christmas Eve, if you sign up, please show up. And the last 3 services are, I think, already almost full. Maybe there's a little bit of room there. The first 2 services, we have some additional space, and so check that out. And here's the deal. I know you because I've been a part of Northern Virginia for 34 years, so I know how you function. because this is like, our congregation is made up of all of these type A, driven folks who you like to keep your options open. And I know that the folks who signed up and didn't show up, none of them are here today. Like it's not you, but I just want to remind, I know you love to keep your options. We've kind of gone through the list and found that we actually have some people, I love this, I would probably do this, who have signed up for 3 services just so they can keep their options open of which one will kind of work when it finally comes down to it. But if you can't come, if you sign up, you can't come, please, let us know. Contact Valerie Nolan. Please don't do that at the last minute because then it just won't help anyone in terms of coming. It's going to be an amazing, amazing Christmas Eve. And if you can be here and there's space in that service, I know that you'll want to be here for that. All right, so we're in the 3rd week of our Grateful series. And the first week we talked about how the spirit of gratitude is the only thing that keeps us from being enslaved to the circumstances of life. Is that if it's not for a spirit of gratitude, then when things are going well, when finances are going well, relationships are going well, physical health is going well, like we're riding a high, things are good. But when things are not going so well financially, relationally, or whatever it is, that we go into a very deep low. And the only thing that sets us free from that, the only thing that keeps us from being enslaved to just the most recent circumstances in our life is a life of gratitude. And we talked about how a life of gratitude, the only way you can cultivate that spirit of gratitude in your life is to move past the awful and go in search of the awesome in your life, because life is always made up in this broken, sinful world of awful and awesome. And if you're not willing to kind of go past the awful and go in search of the awesome, you will just miss some of the amazing things that God is doing in your life. And then last week we talked about the interconnectedness between gratitude and generosity. And we talked about how our gratitude for what God has done for us, everything that he's given us, all of the generous things that he has provided for us, transforms generosity from being an obligation to being an act of worship. Generosity can either be an obligation or it can be an act of worship. And that has to do with whether it flows out of generosity or whether it flows out of something else, whether it flows out of gratitude or whether it flows out of something else. It enlarges our capacity to live these big, bold, generous lives that we were created to live, these lives where we hold on loosely to everything that God has entrusted, not just our finances, not just our possessions, but our time, our emotions, all of that, we hold on loosely, and we are willing to make them available to the one who has made them available to us. That we are willing to make them available to the God who has given us everything that we have. Today we're going to talk about the connection between gratitude and its relationship to forgiveness. And I want to begin by looking at a familiar story about gratitude that's found in Luke 17, that if you grew up in the church or your parents were followers of Jesus, and I know that's not the narrative of everyone who's a part of our church, and I love the fact that we have folks that this is the first expression of like being connected to the body of Christ. But some of you maybe grew up in the church, maybe you had like back when they called it Sunday school, you had Sunday school teachers. This is probably a story that your Sunday school teacher taught you. This is probably a story that your parents maybe read to you when you were a little kid. This is probably a story, if you're a parent, that you read to your little kids. Here's what it is. It starts in verse 11, and it will be familiar if you grew up hearing this. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. And they stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, and we'll talk about this, as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, he came back, praising God in a loud voice. And he threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, wait a second, weren't there 10 that were healed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner. And then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Now, the moral of the story, on the surface, the moral of the story is really pretty clear, right? The moral of the story is don't be like the 9 lepers who get healed by Jesus and then go on their merry way and don't bother to come back and thank him. Be like the one who came back to fall on his face before the feet of Jesus and thank him. Like, live a life of gratitude. Be thankful. That's the moral of the story, kind of on the surface. And all of that's true. But you can't really understand the full meaning of this story that comes near the end of chapter 17 unless you read it in its context. Because Luke, who's the writer of the gospel, positions this story, he positions this right after a section that precedes it where Jesus is talking to the disciples about forgiveness. And that section begins in verse 3, and it begins this way. So, watch yourselves. Watch yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Now, when Jesus says, when you've been wronged, when someone has done something that's hurt you, said something that's hurt you, watch yourselves. Watch yourselves. Why does he say that? Well, it's because when you've been wronged, your attention immediately becomes externally focused. That's the way it happens to me as well. Like when someone says something that hurts me, when someone does something that hurts me, betrays me, whatever, my attention immediately is externally focused. And I think that's true for most of us. Our focus is on the person who has hurt us. Our focus is on the thing that has been said or the thing that has been done that has hurt us. But while you're focused on all these external things, there are things going on inside of you beneath the surface that can wreck your life. Things that can distort you, things that can twist you into becoming someone God did not create you to be. Things like bitterness and resentment and anger and wrath. Did you know that the word wrath, this is kind of interesting, the word wrath and the word wreath come from the same Anglo-Saxon word. It comes from a word that means twisted or distorted. And you think about a wreath is this beautiful creation, especially the Christmas wreaths that we see, this time of year. But an evergreen, which makes up a wreath, an evergreen does not grow that way. Like you can't go out and cut down a wreath like that. If someone says, hey, we're going to go cut down some Christmas wreaths. No. They don't come like that. They don't grow like that. It's twisted. It's distorted. The evergreen is twisted. It's distorted into that shape. So it makes sense that the word wreath and the word wrath come from the same word because that's what wrath does. That's what anger does. That's what bitterness does. They twist you. They distort you into something else. And it doesn't twist you into something that is more beautiful, like a wreath. Like a wreath gets twisted, the evergreen gets twisted into something that's even more beautiful. It doesn't twist you into something that is more beautiful. It twists you into something that is less beautiful. So if you can't forgive your parents, for instance, for things that they've done, it will distort you. It will twist you. And it will probably distort your relationship with your kids as well. If you can't forgive the person who broke up with you, it will distort you. And it will probably distort your other relationships, including your relationship with the opposite sex. That's just the way that works. And when someone wrongs you, Jesus says, watch yourselves. Watch yourselves. Pay attention to what's going on inside and be willing to forgive. Now, there may be some of you watching online or you're here, and as soon as I start talking about this, you go, I really need this. I really need this message because there's someone who has hurt me. There's someone who has said some things that's hurt me. There's somebody who's done some things that has hurt me, and I'm struggling with forgiving them. I'm struggling with extending grace. I really, really need this message, and because I'm having a difficult time forgiving them. But there are others of you who may, as I start to talk about this today, who may feel like this is a message for someone else. Maybe it's someone else who is sitting next to you. and you are so hoping that they're listening. You're thinking, get off your phone. Like, you need to hear what the pastor is saying. Or maybe they aren't here. And so you're gonna give them the notes, or make sure they watch it online, or you're gonna send it to them, whatever. But as for you, you feel like you're doing pretty good right now. There's no one you're angry at. There's no one that you feel any bitterness towards. There's no one that you feel like you need to forgive right now. And I would just say to those of you that fall in that category, don't worry, that will change. That will change, because we live in a world of snubs and mistreatment and microaggressions and abuse and injustice and oppression and betrayal. That's just life this side of heaven. So if there's not someone you need to forgive right now, there will be. That's why Jesus talks so much about this issue of forgiveness. Because when people hurt us, our normal posture is to want to hurt them in return, to make them pay for what they've done. Now, we would never say that, especially Christians. Like, we would never say that when someone has hurt us, when someone has done something that's hurt us or said something that's hurt us, that we actually want to make them pay for what we've done. We would say, oh no, we're much more gracious than that. So we would never talk about it, but it's often the way that we function. And you when you think about it, like, at times when someone has hurt us, when someone has said something has hurt us or done something has hurt us, we stop caring about their needs. We stop thinking as much about their needs. And it's just like, why should I think about their needs right now, given what they've just said or given what they've just done? Or we gossip about them under the guise of asking people to pray for them. Like, that's how Christians gossip. If you haven't learned that yet, that's the way they gossip. Like, oh, I just got it. You just need to pray for this person. And let me just tell you specifically what you need to pray about. Because there's some very, very specific things that they need some help with. And let me just kind of run down through the list of that. Or we hope that what they did will somehow blow up in their face. Or we root for them to fail in some way. We want them to pay us back with the same currency they used to hurt us. And that's the currency of pain. So if they experience pain, then it feels like somehow they're paying back the debt that they owe us. But Jesus knows that process, even though it feels good in the moment, that process will distort us, that process will twist us and turn us into something that we were not created to be. And that's why Jesus says to his disciples in verse 3, if your brother sins, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. And then look at verse 4, just in case you're going, oh, he's just talking about folks that kind of fail out there. He's really not talking about people that hurt us. No, he's talking about people who hurt us. If he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times comes back to you and says, I repent, forgive him. In other words, Jesus is saying, I don't want forgiveness to be this one-time thing that happens in your life. I don't want forgiveness to be this rare occurrence that shows up in your life. I want you to live a lifestyle of forgiveness. I want you to live a lifestyle of grace. I want your entire life to be marked by grace. And the kind of forgiveness that Jesus calls us to is not this big mystical thing that is driven by our emotions and manifested by how we feel towards this person. You know, that's what we turn forgiveness into, is that we turn it into this emotional thing and we measure it on the basis of how we feel towards the person. You know, I talk to folks all the time. I deal with this myself, who are struggling with forgiving someone. And they'll say, I thought I forgave them, but now, like, I'm having these feelings, and it feels like I didn't forgive them. And it's really clear, like, when you have those conversations, and some of you maybe are going through that right now, you say, well, I thought I forgave them, and now I still have these bad feelings, and so maybe I haven't. Is that forgiveness is not something that is rooted in our emotions and is not something that is based on how we feel towards the person who has hurt us. Because the feelings that we have toward the person who has hurt us, they will change from week to week, from day to day, sometimes from hour to hour. Like, you cannot judge whether you have extended forgiveness, whether you have extended grace based on how you feel in the moment about this person, because that will change from moment sometimes to moment. Forgiveness is actually this very tangible act of bearing the pain, bearing the debt for someone else's wrong. So for instance, when you want to respond to hurtful words that have been spoken to you with your own hurtful words back, but you don't, that's incredibly painful to not respond in the way that you want to respond in that moment, because it feels so good when someone has said something hurtful to you to respond with hurtful words back. But when you don't do that, when you resist that, it's painful, but every time you do that, you are paying the debt that someone else owes. That's what forgiveness looks like. Or for instance, when you want to keep running someone down who has hurt you, and you want to keep running them down to your friends, but you don't. Now that can be incredibly painful because it feels so good to talk poorly about someone who has hurt us. And so to not do that, to resist doing that, can be really, really painful at times. But every time you do that, you are paying the debt that someone else owes. And that's what forgiveness looks like. Or when someone who has hurt you begins to prosper, begins to prosper in some way, and you want to take them down. You want to keep them from prospering, but you don't. That can be an incredibly painful thing to do because it feels so good to be able to somehow keep them from going to the next level of joy in their own lives, given the fact of what they have done or what they have said to you. But when you resist that, even though that's painful to resist that, every time you do that, you are paying the debt that someone else owes. And that's what forgiveness looks like. Unforgiveness, here's a couple of quick definitions. Unforgiveness is getting stuck in a pain that will ultimately destroy you and destroy the people around you. Forgiveness is choosing to embrace pain that will ultimately heal you and heal the people around you. See, here's the thing about unforgiveness and forgiveness. Both of them involve pain. You can't avoid the pain. Unforgiveness and forgiveness involve pain, but one is a pain that heals and the other is a pain that destroys. Now, the disciples hear this message from Jesus about this kind of gracious living and this kind of forgiveness that says if someone hurts you 7 times and 7 times they come back and repent, forgive them. Their response is probably the same as your response, maybe even in this moment as you're listening to this message. Their response is, that's impossible. No one can do that. That's kind of spiritual hyperbole. Jesus, no one can actually extend that kind of grace in their lives. And this is what they say in verse 15. Sounds very, very spiritual what they say. The apostles say to the Lord, in response to this, they say to the Lord, increase our faith. Increase our faith. Now on the surface, that sounds very spiritual, right? Jesus, I don't have enough faith. It's going to take so much faith, so much more faith than I have to do what you're asking me to do. And so increase my faith so I can do what you're calling me to do. But actually, what they're doing is blaming Jesus. They are saying, Jesus is going to take a ton of faith to live this stuff out. And so far, you have not given us enough faith to do this. So give us more faith. Increase our faith. Jesus, you need to do something else so that we can live out this gracious life that you've called us to. And look at how Jesus responds. He calls them on that. Verse 6. Jesus replies, faith? If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. In other words, Jesus saying, you don't need more faith. You're just using that as an excuse. You have all the faith you need. All you need is just the faith the size of a mustard seed. You don't need more faith. You guys have plenty of faith. You just need to put your faith into practice, your faith into action. Now, some of you are probably wondering, okay, what does this have to do with gratitude? And what does this have to do with the story of the 10 lepers? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because actually it has a lot to do with it, because the only thing that sets us free to forgive this way is a life of gratitude. And let me unpack that a little bit. First, there's a couple things that I want you to notice in this encounter that Jesus has with these 10 lepers. The first thing is where they were positioned in relationship to Jesus. Look at verse 12, chapter 17. They stood at a distance. They stood very, very far away. So far away, actually, that they had to call out in a loud voice just so Jesus could hear them, because they were so far away. They called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Now, why did the lepers stay at such a great distance away from Jesus and actually everyone else? Well, it's not what you think. It wasn't about being contagious. Leprosy wasn't like COVID, okay? You don't have to socially distance to make sure you don't spread it to someone else. Being within 6 feet of someone who has leprosy doesn't put you at risk of contracting the disease. The distancing doesn't have anything to do with like the contagiousness of the disease. It has to do with emotional, spiritual stuff. Lepers were considered spiritually unclean. And if you touched a leper, or even if you got too close to a leper, you were considered spiritually unclean as well. So lepers, think about this, lepers couldn't shake hands with anyone, they couldn't hug anyone, they couldn't embrace anyone. Like, we've experienced that for, 9 months? Where like we just go, man, I just wish I could just shake someone's hand. I wish when I came into church that I didn't have to do that stupid thing, and I wish I didn't do that stupid thing, that I could just give a hug to the person that I love, and I want to show them that I care about them, and I want to give them an embrace, and we can't wait till that happens again. But that's been just 9 months. Think about how hard that's been for 9 months. These guys, lepers, had to live that their entire lives. No handshakes. No embraces, no physical contact with someone outside the community. And that's why lepers lived such isolated lives. They had to keep their distance. They couldn't have a relationship with other people. Lepers could only be around lepers. They weren't quarantined for a few weeks or for a few months. They were quarantined for their whole lives. That's the first thing I want you to notice. The second thing I want you to notice is the order that everything takes place. Look at verse 14. Jesus said, go, show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. And as they went, they were cleansed. Now think about that. You know, I think sometimes, at least for me, when I've read this story or when I encountered it as a kid, I just pictured the encounter a little bit different. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure if I was told in a different way. But the picture that I had is that there's these 10 lepers, and they come to Jesus, and Jesus touches them, and in that moment, they are healed. And Jesus says, now go show everyone that I've healed you. Go show the priest that you've been healed. That's the way that I imagine. That's not what happens. What happens is that they are way far away because of the spiritual, emotional distancing that had to take place. They cry out to Jesus, have pity on us. And Jesus says to them, go and show the priests what has happened. Now, at this point, nothing has happened. And the implication, of course, is that they're going to go show the priests that they are healed, but they are not healed yet. So think about that. These 10 lepers who have been lepers their whole lives, but when Jesus tells them to go show themselves to the priest, they trust Jesus so much that they immediately head out to find the nearest priest, even though nothing has changed yet. And it's on their way to tell the priest that they've been healed, that they are healed. It's on their way to tell the priests that they are healed. That they are healed. Now, this is not some name it or claim it kind of thing, which sometimes this gets turned into. This is not about if you just keep saying that God has healed you enough that he will heal you. This is not just about positive thinking or possibility thinking or forcing God's hand because we claim it, we name it, we claim it, and then God does it because we name it and claim it. It has nothing to do with it. This is about being obedient to Jesus and trusting Jesus even when it doesn't make sense given the circumstances. This is about how our obedience to Jesus cannot be determined by our ability to figure out what Jesus is doing or how Jesus is doing it or when Jesus is going to do it. This is about being obedient to Jesus and trusting Jesus and leaving the rest up to Jesus. If you wait until you have everything figured out to put your trust in Jesus, you will never put your trust in Jesus. If you wait to connect all the dots so that it all lines up, you say, oh, I see what Jesus is doing here. I understand why he calls me to be obedient in this way with my life, with my time, with my finances, whatever it is, with my relationships, with the way I handle my relationship. Like I understand, like it all lines up and makes perfect sense. If you wait to fully understand why Jesus calls us to what he calls us to, you will never really put your trust in him. So all lepers are cleansed, all 10. So the healing is the same, the cleansing is the same, but the response is not the same. 9 of those who are cleansed move on with their lives, and they distance themselves from the source of the cleansing. Only 1 comes back, and look at what he does. Verse 15 and 16. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet, and he thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Now, there's a reason that Luke reminds us or tells us that he was a Samaritan. Because here's a guy who was actually considered doubly unclean. He was considered unclean because he was a leper, but he was also considered unclean because he was a Samaritan. And Samaritans were religious outsiders. Samaritans were not Jews. Samaritans were believed something different. They were religious outsiders. And so he was considered unclean because he was a leper, but he was also considered unclean within that community because he was a religious outsider. So maybe more than any of the other 9 who were cleansed, this guy has a profound appreciation for what Jesus has done, and it brings him back to the feet of Jesus, which is why Luke positions this story right after the conversation that he has with his disciples about forgiveness, because you can't forgive the way that Jesus calls you to forgive unless you are overwhelmed with gratitude about your own cleansing. You cannot extend grace the way God calls you to extend grace until you are overwhelmed with gratitude about the grace that you have received, until you're overwhelmed with gratitude about your own cleansing. If you are a leper who is cleansed and then just goes away, if you're like one of the 9, you'll find it hard to show grace to other lepers because you will forget who you are. You will forget that you are a leper too. But if you keep coming back to Jesus, if every day you find yourself falling at Jesus' feet, filled with gratitude for what he has done for you, you will never forget who you are. You will never forget that you are a leper who has been cleansed also. And that will set you free to forgive in a way that, just like the disciples, they thought was impossible, that you think is impossible. It will set you free to forgive in a way that you thought you would never have enough faith to forgive. To forgive in a way that you thought only spiritual giants, only those with huge amounts of faith can actually live out this kind of life, this gracious life that God has called us to. You will be able to forgive in a way that you thought you would never have enough faith to do. So what Luke is reminding us of is this: just keep coming back to Jesus. Just keep coming back to Jesus. Just keep coming back to the source of your cleansing. Just find a way every day, whatever it is, however it fits into your life, find a way to keep falling at the feet of Jesus and thanking him for the cleansing that he has provided in your life. Because folks, that will transform you. Like the only way that you can hold bitterness in your heart, the only way you can hold anger in your heart, the only way that you can hold wrath in your heart is to stay away from Jesus. Like if you want to keep hanging on to some anger, if you want to keep hanging on to some bitterness, don't fall at the feet of Jesus. Because when you fall at the feet of Jesus, when you fall at the feet of the source of your cleansing, it will remind you of who you are, that you are a leper who has been cleansed. And when you fall at the feet of Jesus, it becomes almost impossible to hang on to bitterness and anger and wrath. So keep finding a way. Keep finding a way every day to fall at the feet of Jesus, to rehearse his cleansing in your life, and to give him praise and thanksgiving for it. It will change you. God, we are so thankful for the cleansing that you have provided. We are the leper in the story. We are the one who needs cleansing. And through what you have done for us on the cross, Lord, you have provided that cleansing to us. And Lord, make us like the leper who comes back and falls at the feet of Jesus and gives praise and thanksgiving, because that's what transforms us and allows us to live these gracious lives that you've called us to live. And Lord, I pray for all of us who have experienced your grace and just need to keep coming back to you. But I also pray to anyone who's watching online, anyone who's in this service today, who has never really experienced your cleansing, never really experienced your forgiveness, your grace, has never really cried out to you like the lepers cried out, Lord, have mercy on us, have pity on us, cleanse us, set us free from that which is keeping us from living the life that you've called us to live. And so, Lord, if there's anyone who is watching today, anyone who's in this space who's never really invited you into their lives, never really asked for your cleansing and your forgiveness, I pray that today would be the day. That they would be able to just pray a simple prayer of, Jesus, come into my life, cleanse me of that which needs to be cleansed, forgive me of that which needs to be forgiven, and allow me to walk out the life that you have created me to live. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Let's stand together.